Namaste, great souls. Today I have a very special guest who will tell us about his amazing near-death experience. His name is Peter Panagore. Peter is a dear friend of mine and a world-famous writer, spiritual teacher, and author of two bestsellers, one of which is called Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning, and the other one is 2 Minutes with God. When I first saw his amazing near-death experience, I was really thrilled, but not surprised when I heard Peter say that shortly after his NDE, he found out about the great spiritual classic, The Autobiography of a Yogi by our Guru Paramhasa Yogananda, and that he now also practices Kriya Yoga, which is our main practice here at our yoga community, as many of you already know. It is a real joy to see once again that so many of the NDE experiences match perfectly with the timeless spiritual teachings of yoga and Vedanta, and leads us to the exact same result, complete blissful union with the divine. Now, before you start with the interview, just a side note, please excuse the quality if you hear some crackling here and there. This is because this interview was initially intended for our Bulgarian audience, and it was simultaneously translated, which I tried to improve as best as I could. And now, without further ado, enjoy Peter's amazing story. Namaste, and I'll talk to you soon. Peter, welcome to Ananda, Bulgaria.
Namaste, everybody.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for responding to my invitation. It's a great joy and honor for me to be here with you, and I'm really happy that we have the opportunity to help more people with your amazing experience. Let's start. Please, Peter, tell us about your near-death experience. How did it happen? What happened?
I was 21 years old, and I was a national student exchange from my university to Montana State University across the United States. I was 21 years old, and during spring break, I took a trip to Canada to go snow caving on backcountry skis and ice climbing. It was a 10-day trip, and I had a backcountry ski partner and a climbing partner, a man who I had just met and planned this trip with. And so we began the trip with skiing out into the backcountry in the mountains and living in snow caves for about 8 days. And it was a time to learn about each other. Tim and I had complementary backcountry skills. I knew first aid, and we had both spent much time in the wilderness. So we were both skilled enough to be where we were. This was not an unusual place for us. And the temperature was probably, in centigrade, well below zero. The snow was maybe 10 feet deep. So when we finished our snow cave trip, we went back to the place where we were going to go climbing. And I'd been a mountain climber. I've been using ropes and technical climbing. And Tim was a certified lead climber on ice. And so even though I'd never climbed ice before, I'd climbed many rocks, and I felt safe and trusting with Tim. Tim had all of the equipment that he needed, but I did not. So I had to borrow or find everything that I needed. And I came up with one axe out of two. And so I climbed with an axe and a hammer, and the hammer was much smaller. And when you put the axe into the ice, you can let go and hang on a strap and relax. But with the hammer, you put the hammer into the ice, you had to hold on. There was no relaxing. And it is possible to climb with a hammer and an axe. But the problem is that with the hammer, I had to grip with my muscles and never relax or rest my muscles. So I quickly got tired, which slowed my climb, significantly slowed it. So by the time we reached the top of the 600-foot climb, 500-foot, 600-foot climb, all the other teams who were climbing that day had already descended and were leaving because I had moved so slowly. It was sunset by the time we reached the top. And as we approached the top, the temperature began to drop, and we knew that we were in serious trouble. When we sat on the ledge and the sun went down, the temperature dropped to 30 degrees. And so hypothermia began immediately. The temperature went way down very fast. And because it was March and we were close to the Arctic Circle. Canada is very, very cold. So
Okay.
I began to have violent shivers. My jaw was clattering. So Tim pulled up the rope into a 300-foot knot. Tim pulled up the rope, and it became tangled in this. It was dark. There were millions of stars in the sky, so it wasn't completely dark. And I had to take off my gloves to untangle the rope, and began to get frostbite on my fingers, which still have damage until today.
Peter, which year was that?
1981. And it was in a time before some of the high-tech equipment for keeping warm. Do you know polypropylene? Extra warm long underwear didn't exist, just wool. And we were wet from our sweat. When the temperature dropped, the hypothermia struck fast. We didn't have extra food or water, and we expected to be down before sunset. We both knew immediately that we were in life or death situation, and the way it looked was death. And so we discussed snuggling, pulling our bodies together, touching our bodies together to stay warm and try to spend the night. But we knew that we were too cold and that we would die for sure. So the only choice we had was to try to climb down to stay alive. So I'm going to make a long story short. There were three rappels or pitches to get to the bottom. And so it took us all night to get to the last one. As we went, our hypothermia got worse, stage by stage. It included confusion, loss of coordination. My lips were frozen.
You couldn't speak?
Only little bits like this. My feet were like blocks of ice. I couldn't bend my toes. When we got to the final pitch, rappel, there were iron pins and rings pounded into the mountain with carabiners and straps and carabiners that we tied ourselves to. And this was the first time during the night where we were safe. We were still about 150 feet up. And by this point, my hypothermia was advanced. All night long, we were consuming our energy, and I had no fat in those days. It felt like my body was starting to consume itself. And I was driving myself forward in survival mode, using my willpower. It felt very animalistic to me. I had no other thought but survival. When we're on this ledge that I just mentioned to the mountain, Tim was to my left, and I took the rope and I tied one end to my harness, took the other end and threw it away. The mountain was shaped like a corner, around the corner to pull it down toward me. But on the first pull, it's jammed. And as strong as I pulled, as hard as I pulled, it only made it worse. And we knew then that we were probably going to die where we stood. Tim was in as bad a shape as I was. Condition, I should say. And he couldn't help me pull the rope because I was afraid to untie it from my harness, because I was afraid to drop it. Because as long as we had the rope, we had some hope. And Tim, when it was tied to my harness, he couldn't reach it. So I couldn't get the rope free. It was sometime before sunrise, and it was getting colder. I began to fall asleep, and I'm going to come back for a moment. Before I began to fall asleep, I came to understand that I was going to die where I stood, and a peace came over me of acceptance. And I thought about my family, and I thought about God, and I realized that I was never going to see my family again, and that God wasn't going to rescue me. And so I became peaceful and accepting. And then I began to fall asleep. And when I would fall asleep, I would lose consciousness. I would lose consciousness, and I would collapse, fall to the rock. But because I was harnessed to the mountain, I didn't fall off the cliff. And falling to the rock would wake me up because I'd smack my head. even though I was wearing a helmet. It would wake me up. I'd pull myself back up again, stand back up, and pull the rope again. And this repeated several times. And this last time I stood up and I had tunnel vision. It was all black on the peripheral of my vision that then faded, came in and closed blackness over me. And I was confused as this was happening. I started looking around, and when it went black, I was looking forward toward the rock. And when it went black, I thought I would lose consciousness. I was awake inside of a darkness, and my body no longer hurt. I was confused because I didn't understand what was happening. And as I was wondering about what was happening, the darkness in front of me expanded to an infinite degree. Way far in the distance, the furthest away in the distance, a tiny dot of light appeared, hundreds of millions of light years away, but bright, the only light in all the darkness. And it moved with speed toward me, getting bigger as it came. It covered that distance that fast. And as it came to me, it telepathically communicated to me without words, "I'm taking you." And I thought, no. I didn't understand what was going on and wasn't going to go. But as it touched me, entered me, and took me, my resistance was futile. The next thing I knew, I was inside of this angelic intellect, all powerful, all comforting, and I relaxed. I had my astral self, and I was carried up through the darkness. People talk about a tunnel. For me, it was like a roadway or an elevator shaft, but I could still see all the vast darkness all around me. I felt like a rag doll where my will did not matter at all. And this being of light was speaking inside of me the whole time. So I accepted where I was. And I was carried this all the way back to where it came from, very rapidly. And I then was burst into, I was suddenly passed through a wall, or the angel opened, and my astral self was gone, and I became my true self, the consciousness, the soul. And I experienced it as, this is all metaphor. So I was the gigantic ball of energy, and my thinking was my being, was my sensory perceptions, no separation between them. I was in a place of no thingness. I had no brain in the way of my thinking. I understood that this was me. I wasn't thinking in words because I had no brain, but my thinking was expansive. I could see as if I was one eyeball, and I could see in every direction as if I was one eye. I could see into the edge of infinity, but not into infinity. I describe it as an illuminated darkness where there was no thing, and I was no thing, and I was content, and I understood my true self. This is me. I remember me. I was alone and unafraid. And then a doorway, a gateway, a portal opened. And as big as I had become, this was 10 times bigger. It appeared like the darkness ripped open into light. And the opening was a flow of light like a waterfall. The most attractive light I had ever encountered, calling to me. And I could see the surface, I could see inside it, and I could see through it. And I saw that the light it was a gateway that led to a tunnel that took me deeper into infinity. And so I touched the light with my consciousness. I moved my consciousness to the light because it was so beautiful. And it felt to me as if it was calling me. And so when I touched it, it flowed into me. And all of these things happened at once. I understood and knew that I was completely and fully known, that every part of my life as Peter was exposed as nakedness. And I heard my name called, but not Peter. My soul name, the name that called my consciousness into being. The soul name, wasn't in words. It was the essence of myself. And I saw the origin of my soul. I saw myself and understood as if I was a single photon, made of the same substance of 10 bazillion photons, infinite photons that made up the divine self. I was tiny light, infinite light, the same but limited, creature from creator. And I could see the size of my soul, and I had lived for eons, and that I had lived many lives. But I was in timelessness, so it seemed like I was living all those lives at the same time. None of them were me. They were all very tiny compared to the enormous size of myself. Understanding all of this, I went through a hell of my own making. And all of this is happening at the same time because it's timelessness. And all of the hurts that I had given away as Peter, I experienced inside of the people to whom I gave it. I became them, feeling what I had done to them. At the same time, I experienced myself as Peter with all my reasoning and emotional attitude that caused me to cause such pain. I understood that all the pain that I gave away in life was mine. And it was so much more pain than my small intent to cause pain. There was a disproportion between the two. And so my intention to cause pain was this big, but the pain I caused was enormous. I could see that this was what it meant to be a human being, that we all hurt each other, and that it wasn't my fault that that's the way it worked. My bad actions weren't bad. They were just harmful and hurtful, but not inherently bad. And I could see a great equality of all humanity was just like me. Through no fault of our own, we hurt each other. But I also made choices to hurt each other, to hurt these other people. And while all this was happening, it was extraordinarily painful to me. I've come to describe it as a divine fire of love. The divine voice was speaking inside me without words. I love you, I made you, I know you. I have always known you. I've known you as Peter, and nothing of Peter is dark to me. I am creator and you are my creature. I saw my soul and my photon self, and I knew that the divine was God, self-evidently so. I was immersed in an ocean of love, and love was right next to me, speaking love inside me. I love you, I forgive you, I know you. I've always loved you, I've always known you. Because of my love, all is forgiven. I love you, I forgive you. All of the love I have been given in my life and all the love I had given away, I also carried that as a treasure in my heart. It was through the ear of love, the eye of love, the consciousness of love, that I could hear the divine voice that was soundless speaking love to me. And when my attention, after my life review, my hellish life review, when it was over, I heard the love most clearly and turned myself toward it irresistibly. And I was infilled with beauty, love, joy, understanding, forgiveness, bliss, paradise, understanding, knowledge, adoration and awe, love and light. And as it flowed inside of my consciousness, inside of my soul, it filled me completely and expanded me even larger. There was so much abundance, and I understood there was infinitely more. I felt as if one more drop and I would obliterate, I would become annihilated, I would become in full union. It was almost painfully beautiful. A moment of beautiful ecstasy before orgasm times a billion. And then I was in this state of forgetfulness of self. My understanding of Peter was gone. And then I contracted again, and Peter came back into memory. And I said, "Am I dead?" And the divine said, "Yes." I said, "I can't die yet." I had gone into a state of union, but I had been retracted back to an outer edge. God said, "Yes, you're dead." And I said, "Well, I can't die now." "Why?" God asked. Also saying, "Come home, it's your time. Come home." God was also saying simultaneously, "It's time for you to come home." And I said, "But my parents are suffering." My sister had vanished when I was 14. She had run away from home, and it broke my family and broke my mom and dad, who they blamed themselves. And I didn't want to take another child from them, because although my sister was alive, it was as if she was dead. And I knew my death would destroy my parents. In an instant, God swept me across heaven, an infinite distance, to the edge of heaven where our universe begins to exist. And my part of me was pushed outside of heaven so that I could see our universe, while most of me was still in heaven being spoken to by the divine. I could see millions of galaxies, and as I watched, I focused on our galaxy, into our solar system, onto Earth. And I could see Earth like a hologram, but it was real. I could see through the Earth. I could see every human being. I could see every human being on Earth all at once, in live time. And everyone was doing 7 billion different things, interacting. There were wars and babies being born and ships on the ocean. I could see everything. And I could see inside of every single person a speck of gold dust glittering. I could see the divine core of every person and saw that it was the same as mine when I had been there, and saw that it was the same gold speck as my own, that I was the same as everyone, made of light. And I could see like a foam covering everyone, and it was Maya, through which no one could see. And they couldn't see the light inside themselves or inside anyone else. Not the way that I could see it, because I understood that every human being is beloved. The voice spoke to me, "All is well, all has been well, all will be well, eternally because of my eternal love." But it wasn't just words, it was the experience of infinite love, indescribable, larger than anything you can imagine. And I understood the impermanence of life, that the length of my life was the snap of my fingers as a human being, and that the wellness and wholeness that I was experiencing would be experienced by everyone. And the way that I could experience love is the way that everyone is loved. I could see my parents. I could see into their hearts. I could see their suffering. I could see the future of their suffering without me. I understood that their time on earth would be also a snap of the fingers, that quick, from my point of view. But I could also see that it would be long and painful for them from their point of view, especially without me. And I could see what their life would be if I came back, less suffering. And because I understood the impermanence of life, I asked, if I go back, can I come back to you, to this divine state of being, of bliss? And God said, it's time for you to come home, but yes. And I said, well, then I choose to live my life. And God said, you won't live your life, and sent me back. I will not live my life. It sounds contradictory, because my life was over as Peter. And when I came back into my body, I had to make a choice as I went. God sent me away, and I had to decide what kind of life I was going to live, right inside the light of the divine being, or some gradient distant from it. I chose a little bit of selfishness instead of full selflessness. I wanted to be, I didn't want to completely lose myself. what I discovered when I got back, that my life had actually ended and that I was a completely different person and was never going to live the life. We've been talking for quite a while. I can stop now if you have questions.
Peter, just briefly before we finish, I was really amazed when I heard in several of your videos when you said that shortly after your ND, you found the autobiography of a yogi of our Guru Paramhasa Yogananda, and you learned about meditation and pranayama techniques like Kriya Yoga, which is our main practice here actually in the yoga community of Ananda. And you can enter through these techniques into higher states of awareness like you experienced in your ND. Can you please just tell us briefly about that, about this experience of yours? How did you find it? And do you practice, and how is it helping you?
All of the above. When I got back to my university 1 year later, I was studying pantomime in the school of Marcel Marceau, students of his. And Marcel Marceau taught Hatha Yoga as part of the practice of mime. My teacher one day asked us if we had ever experienced prana. I had never heard of it. So he sat us in some yoga seated position, asked us to focus and concentrate on our belly buttons, and take one hand and put it under the belly button, the other hand and raise it up with focused concentration and breath. And to me, it felt like I had an energy ball in my hands, and I stretched it up as a cord right past up to the top of my head. And he said after this exercise, "Did anybody feel this energy ball?" And I said, "Me." So he called me up to the front of the class. Nobody else had felt it. He asked me to kneel in front of him and close my eyes, and to put my hands up like this, and to concentrate on my palms. My eyes are closed. He said, "What do you feel?" I said, "I feel pinwheels on my palms in opposite directions." So I opened my eyes. His hands were this far from my hands. And he asked me how long I had been practicing. He said, "How do you know how to do this?" I said, "I don't know." I lied. I had never felt it before, but I knew that it was connected to my near-death experience. It was at that time, that week, that this copy fell into my hands. And I read it, and when I read this chapter, it's chapter 26, The Science of Kriya Yoga. I believed him. I believed that if I learned to practice Kriya, I could find my subtle body, because I was lost in the world. I understood nobody could see what I could see, and I needed to find my way home. Around the same time, within a couple of weeks, I came across the Yoga Sutras, which also talk about Kriya. And so I began, because I was practicing Hatha Yoga, I began to incorporate the breathing techniques in my yoga practice. I would use my breath using pranayama and move my mind inside my body and not use my imagination. I would look at all of my muscles in order to train my mind to look inside my body. And it eventually led me to focusing on my chakras without thought or imagining their colors or their forms or their meanings, and focusing mostly here. And breathing my mind out through my third eye, I began to see the purple with the stars, and it opened my third eye for me. And this became the basis of all of my interior yoga practice. And I would run my breath down my spine. And what I thought was, because I had an extra access to my soul, I could find my way inside myself back to the divine again. And that's what's happened. And so now, 40 years later, with 40 years of practice, my chakras are open and they are connected. Within the first 5 years, I had a Kundalini awakening. I've been in pursuit of Shaktipat because I have not been able to put into words the divine message itself. So all of my practice has been to try to negate my false self, to allow the peace to flow through me so others might feel it for themselves and deepen their spiritual journey, and they don't need me, because then they would know that it's inside them all of the time. So I became a church minister, practicing Kriya yoga with Hatha yoga and Theravada Buddhist meditation with centering prayer, all as a practice to self-empty, a practice of a meditation practice to self-empty, to learn to be silent and to silence my thoughts and to allow myself to be a channel of peace. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter, for your time. Thank you so much, and it was really wonderful. It was beautiful. You helped in this video. Will help so many people here in Bulgaria, and we are really grateful and honored to. I'm eternally grateful to you for your time. Finally, Peter, I would like to invite you officially to come to Bulgaria whenever you want, and let you know that this will be a great joy for us, for all of us, to welcome you here. And you are welcome. We can meditate together and show you our beautiful country. It will be amazing. Thank you so much, Peter, and God bless you.
God bless you too, and thank you for the invitation to your show and to your beautiful nation. If I can get there, I will.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Gopal.
Bye-bye.
Peace to you all.